In this video we're going to be looking at key area 2.4, which is reproduction. So all living organisms must reproduce in order to make new individuals and continue their species. Most animals use sexual reproduction to do this, and that involves combining the genetic information from two individuals, i.e. the parents, to produce offspring. Now we're going to have a look at just some of the terminology. We're looking here at sexual versus asexual reproduction. Now, asexual reproduction that's here is a reproduction that takes place without sex cells. Now, examples of that would be amoeba or bacteria, where they're just basically dividing. There are some organisms, some plants, that will actually reproduce asexually. So things like strawberry plants, you see them with runners, and you get little strawberry plants that end up with the end of the runners, and that is a form of asexual reproduction. But larger organisms tend to reproduce sexually, that is with sex cells, and that includes humans and most animals and plants. So, as I've just mentioned, asexual reproduction takes place in some plants. What is happening is that the organism makes an exact copy of itself. Other examples of this would be yeast cells. They reproduce asexually as well, where they produce little buds and then new cells are formed, but they're just exact copies of the original cell. So it's not involving any sex cells, and it's more common certainly in plants than in animals. And because the offspring are an exact copy, the offspring are said to be clones of the parents. So let's have a look at sexual reproduction and some of the terminology that comes around this. Now, sex cells have got this word that we use, it's called gametes. So sex cells are known as gametes, and in humans there are two gametes. In a male there is this sperm, and that is produced in the testes, and there is the egg, which is produced in the ovary. Now these cells here, you'll see they've got this term here called haploid, and that is because all sex cells, or all gametes, are known to be haploid. That means that they only have one set of chromosomes. So here you'll see that there's three sets of chromosomes, sorry, only one set of chromosome. Did I say one set of chromosomes? Here you'll see there's 3 chromosomes, and up here 3 chromosomes. And what happens is when fertilisation takes place in sexual reproduction, the male and the female gametes will fuse together and they'll form this cell here that is known as a zygote. Now the zygote is said to be diploid. That means that it has got 2 sets of chromosomes. One set of chromosomes from the mother, so these ones here, and this one, and one set of chromosomes from the father, this one, and this one, producing what is known as a diploid individual. To help you remember which one is which, I often think of haploid as half the number and diploid as di for double. So that means that there are 2 sets of chromosomes in the diploid zygote. So this is just a wee recap of that information, in case you can't read my writing that was there before. So during sexual reproduction, the sex cells from each parent fuse to form a zygote. Sex cells are known as gametes, and you've got the sperm cell from the male produced in the testes, and the egg cell that is produced, or the ova as it's sometimes known, produced in the ovaries. Gametes are haploid. That means that they only have one set of chromosomes, and when the male and female gametes fuse together, the zygote produced is diploid, and this means that it's 2 sets of chromosomes. Now when it comes to a human, what happens is that the sperm cell has 23 chromosomes, one set, and the egg cell has 23 chromosomes, one set, and when they fuse together it forms an individual which has got 46 chromosomes, and that has 2 sets of chromosomes. Because what we're saying is that there's actually 23 pairs there. What is happening is one of the sets of chromosomes comes from one parent, and one of the sets of chromosomes comes from the other parent. So let's go on and have a look at fertilizations. Now, sometimes people get confused with the terminology around about this. There's this term that's here, which is pollination, and pollination is not fertilization, it's just really the transfer of pollen grains from an anther to a stigma. The anther is the male part of the flower and the stigma is the female part, but we'll have a look at that just in a wee moment. That's not to be confused with fertilization, which is the process by which the nucleus of the male sex cell from a pollen grain fuses with the nucleus of an ovule to form a zygote. And we'll have a look at what all that wording actually means. Now, reproduction in flowering plants. Well, plants can use sexual or asexual reproduction to produce new individuals. But flowering plants are the structures responsible for reproduction. Well, obviously, flowers are the structures responsible for reproduction in flowering plants, and that is sexual reproduction. And usually the male and female reproductive organs are both present in the same flower. I've missed out the female part here on this, but usually the male and the female parts. So let's have a wee recap over the parts of a flower. Now, over here we've got the anther, and the anther in the flower is what contains the male gametes, and they're the pollen grains. And we've got our anther here at the top here, and then we've got the filament that holds up the anther. So the pollen produced there, and the ovaries or the female gametes are produced, sorry, not the ovary, the ovules or the eggs or the female gametes are produced down here in the ovary, in the flower. And up here we've got what is known as the stigma, and that is the sticky part of the flower. It's sticky there to help it receive pollen. And coming down from the stigma there is this tube which is known as the style, and that's important when it comes to the process of fertilisation. So pollen makes its way to the stigma, and it can get there either by insects taking it onto the stigma, or it can be blown in the wind if it's a wind pollinated plant. So it ends up on the stigma. Well, for fertilisation to take place, you've got the pollen grain, and here's a wee picture of a pollen grain here. And the pollen grain's up in the stigma, but the ovule is away down in the ovary. So how does it get there? Well, the nucleus that's inside this pollen grain has got to get down to that ovule. And so what happens is the pollen actually grows a tube, a pollen tube, and you'll see there's one starting here on this diagram, and then down here you'll see pollen tubes growing out of these pieces of pollen. So what happens is the pollen grain lands up on the stigma, and this pollen tube grows its way down the style towards the ovary, and the nucleus from this pollen grain will make its way down this pollen tube, make its way down, and the pollen tube will actually make its way right into the ovary. And the haploid, because pollen grains or the male gametes are haploid in plants as well. They just have one set of chromosomes. And that haploid pollen grain nucleus will make its way down to the ovule, and then it will fuse with the haploid ovule that's there. And that will produce, again, our diploid zygote. Now the zygote that's there in the plant will form a seed, and the wall of the ovary will become a fruit. So in the process of sexual reproduction in humans, then obviously eventually what's going to be formed there is going to be a baby, But when it comes to sexual reproduction in plants, what's going to be happening is a seed will form and the wall of the ovary becomes a fruit.